adevărată găzduirea, înalt și somnoros. Răcoare ne cuprinde și în toată mănăstirea ne pare un rai frumos.
This road leads to Noul Neamț Monastery of Holy Ascension. For 1 century and a half, it stands on a hillside on the right side of Dniester River, between the towns of Bender and Tiraspol. It stands on state, political and Christian crossroad. For 1 century and a half, people come here in search of spiritual healing, solace and solitude. Its golden domes are visible from afar to those approaching the village of CHITCANI, after the name of which the monastery is also known as CHITCANI Monastery. Believers and tourists are coming here from near and afar. Monastery is open both on weekdays and holidays. However, the monastic life, services, prayers, sacraments, obedience is almost invisible to an outsider. Only a few solitary figures in long black robes will remind you that you are on the territory of an acting monastery. It got its present shape at the beginning of the last century, and it was built almost 50 years. The monastery's history, a complex and dramatic one, is closely linked with the history of region. It has undergone through various events, wars, destruction, persecution, but the story of its creation is truly unique. It all began in the mid of 19th century, when Alexander Cuza came to power in Romania. The Orthodox Church was subordinated to the state and subjected to cruel persecution. However, by the will of God, due to these events, a new monastery appeared on Orthodox map of Moldova, called Neamț, after its spiritual mother, Lavra Neamț. This is one of the oldest monasteries in Romania. For 5 centuries, Lavra enjoyed the patronage of Moldovan hospodars. It was granted many lands and estates. But during the reforms of Alexander Cuza, all these were taken back. The assets were sold. A rich library was destroyed. One of the Lavra's monks wrote then, "The mind gets turbid, the heart bleeds when one sees the robbery of what was collected over the centuries." Unable to stand it any longer, the monks began to leave the Lavra, heading in all directions, Greece, Ukraine, Bessarabia. In autumn 1861, the Lavra was left by 32 monks who secretly crossed the river Prut. They hoped to found a new monastery in Bessarabia, then part of the Russian Empire, on the land donated to Lavra by Hospodar Alexandru cel Bun. They carried the most precious wealth, a copy of the miraculous icon of Our Lady of Neamț, and 2 suitcases with books rescued by Lavra's confessor and librarian Father Andronic, and which later became the basis of the famous Noul Neamț library. Lavra's lands in Bessarabia were ruled in those years by hieromonk Theophan, an extraordinary and significant personality for Noul Neamț monastery. By secular name Theodor Christa, the father Theophan took monastic vow at 19 years old. It was said about him, an educated man, full of zeal for God and love for people. He lodges a petition with Archbishop of Chisinau on the establishment of a new monastery on the territory of Bessarabia. In the morning, the no-Neamț monks awake to the sound of wooden beater like the monks of Neamț Lavra many centuries in a row. The time, 5:30. From 6 to 9, worship. Bells ring in the holidays. On weekdays, just one morning ring. By the way, the bells are the very same that were set almost 100 years ago. And these are villages of Kopanka and CHITCANI, where in the middle of 19th century arrived the monks who fled from Lavra and with the help of God, nourished by faith and hope, began to build up a new convent. But first it was a long winter in a village near Chisinau, where 32 fugitive monks lived settled in just in 2 houses, feeding themselves with corn porridge and having 4 sheepskins and 4 pairs of boots. There have been 3 years of the struggle of Father Theophan for the monastery's right on Lavra's estates in Kopanka and CHITCANI. Indeed, all these lands have always been at geopolitical crossroads. They passed not just once from one state into the hands of another. Finally, multiple trips of Father Theophan to St. Petersburg were crowned with success. On January 13th, 1864, Emperor Alexander II approved the project on establishing no-Neamț monastery friary of Holy Ascension. The oldest building on the territory of monastery, Church of Saint Nicholas, named so in honor of Saint Nicholas the Wonder Worker. It was built 30 years before the foundation of the monastery, based on resources of CHITCANI parishioners. Precisely in this small church, on the eve of Christmas, 1.5 centuries ago, the first monastic service was accomplished. And precisely around it, the construction of no-Neamț monastery was developed, which started immediately after the imperial decree by Father Theophan, who was unanimously elected abbot by the monastery brotherhood. In monastery, the first step was to construct fraternal structure, a long single-story building with cells for 2 people, because monks had to live somewhere, and the monastic community was constantly growing. Then it was laid and consecrated the foundation of the Holy Cross Church refectory, which was built more than 10 years. Why refectories in many monasteries are situated right in the churches? Here they will answer you this. God created angels and man. He feeds angels with Holy Spirit, and our temporal food is likened to the gifts of Holy Spirit. Therefore, before a meal, one should pray and cross oneself in gratitude for the gift. Gracious traditions of receiving the food in temple exist in those monasteries where such possibilities exist. And this is possible in no-Neamț since the construction of the Holy Cross refectory. Twice a year, and the Cross Sunday of Lent, and the feast of the exaltation of the Lord's Cross, the tables are taken out of the refectory, and the worship services are held. 2 main temples are towering in the center of monastic complex, Amazing Beauty of Ascension Church and 5 Bells Assumption Church. First, back on times of Theophan Abbot, the Ascension Cathedral was erected. This and the chapel were designed by St. Petersburg architect, whose name remained unknown. Mural of the temple, made in tradition of Nestorov and Serebryakov art school, was restored at the end of last century. It is restored with care and love, following the fragments and remnants of ancient murals, which heavily suffered during the closure of the monastery. And today, similarly to the times of 100 years ago, the temple walls are decorated with the same faces of saints and same scenes from scriptures. The temple iconostasis is a new one, made in the 90s of last century, and next to this, the ancient reliquary, stored particle relics, sent back in 19th century by Patriarch of Constantinople and Jerusalem as gift to Novo Neamț monastery. Patron saint of monasticism has long been regarded the Virgin Mother, so the icons with her depiction are particularly venerated in the monastery. New icon of Neamț Mother of God. Newly painted icon Virgin Mary's Assumption. Kozelchansk Mother of God icon, after the place where it first showed her miraculous power. After the death of Father Theophan, the work and care for the further settlement of the monastery were took over by his friend and assistant, Hieroschema monk Andronik, who became second abbot of the monastery. During his times, the library was built, which is now the monastery museum. It contains old pictures and worship objects. 2 relics are among the exhibits: neck stone of Father Theophan and the Gospel of Father Andronik. The library is now in the new building, which also includes printing and sewing workshops. The new library, continuing the tradition of Father Andronik, the monastery began to collect recently, but it already has about 10,000 volumes. Many books come from Moscow Patriarchate. Some are printed in its own printing press, some are presented by parishioners. The famous Andronik library, collected by him in 20 years, was partially removed during the closure of the monastery in the National Archives, but mostly just stolen. Some of the documents and valuable books were returned to the monastery. Ancient books and manuscripts of 18th-19th century are the pride value of monastic library. Time-veiled ancient volumes are contemporary of the monastery, witnesses of its uneasy history. Father Andronik was the abbot of the monastery just 8 years. After his death, the abbot was Father Hermann. At his 19, he went to Athos mountain and took monastic vow. During the Russian-Turkish War, he goes to front as male nurse and was awarded a medal. It was precisely in times of Father Hermann when monastery acquires its present form. 2 additional cell shelters are constructed, as well as stone workshops, but what is most important, the 4th, Assumption Cathedral and the bell tower. White, blue, beautiful 5 bells temple is also known as Winter One.